Sharing live video. Okay, says we are live. I'm waiting to see if like one person, if I see one person like pop on, then I'll know that it's actually working. So, there's somebody. Hi.
Hi.
So we are live. I just went live accidentally. I'm now going live on purpose, and this is my beautiful daughter Naomi, who many of you have seen and heard much about from my Facebook page. So, hi everybody.
10 people are watching us. Starting.
Yeah, people are watching.
Hi,
Everybody. Rosie, Randall, Sammy, and friends, May. Hi everyone. Good to see you. So we wanted to talk today about the concept of leadership. Actually, I was planning to do most of the talking. Naomi just really wants to say hi, so I'm not sure how much like in this conversation she wants to be, although you're welcome to be in it to the extent that you wish to be. Same with you guys. If you pop up with questions, I'll try to answer them, and if I can't answer them in real time, then I'll try to circle back around and
I'll tell you if
answer,
anyone asks any questions.
Oh, okay, great. I'll try to get them in. If it's not like possible in the flow, then I'll circle back around after.
35 people.
But I wanted to talk a little bit about the concept of leadership, because this is a concept that I feel like is coming up so big right now with our nation and really the whole world, the United States of America, but really the whole world, in so much change and conflict, struggle, danger even, and just layers upon layers of potential for transformation and a lot of uncertainty and a lot of division. And there's been so much pain in this for me, and I feel like probably, you know, many people can relate to that. That this has been a really searing time for the heart, that it's been really difficult to not emotionally go through this, and one can't really stay to the side anymore and be safe and be outside of it all, because these are issues that affect all of us to such an enormous extent. So one issue that I really wanted to bring up is that of leadership, and I mean this in the sense of the political sense, like who's, you know, the governmental sense, like the people that we consider in charge, the so-called authorities or representatives, and what does it mean to be a leader? What do we want in terms of leadership in this world that we are co-creating? And I want us to all acknowledge at the very beginning that we are co-creators in whatever outcome comes through here. Like, we're all part of, you know, we're part of this transformation and this rite of passage. It can't happen in a passive way. It can't happen by us like sitting to the side and being inert and waiting for people to tell us what to do. It's just not that type of moment, right? And that's part of this whole conversation about leadership that I want to have. So obviously there's a great deal of dissatisfaction on the part of many with the leadership, in quotes, that we have here in this country, in the United States of America. Not just the president, the entire structure, the entire power structure, as being corrupt in many ways and not representing the people's highest good. And even the very idea of what leadership is and even can be, I feel like has been very much sullied. So like when people hear the word leader, they actually have a negative connotation to the word itself. Like, I don't want a leader. I want to be self-governing. I don't want to be led. And I think that there's a huge history of why that's true, beginning with, I mean, we could go thousands of years back in history and looking at the idea of hierarchical dominance and leadership, and how we now associate being led with being passive and being told what to do. And there's reasons for that, and it's because, I mean, the churches, you know, the large empires, the imperial empires that have been throughout history, have always asked us to give up our power to something outside of ourselves in order to be led by that thing. So if you look at like the relationship of, you know, going to a church and having a priest absolve your sin, that's just an example. I do not have a face mask on because I am in my home right now. So we are at home, and the only person here with me is this beloved right here. Thanks for your concern on that one. We do wear masks if we need to. So, you know, the whole idea of going to an external authority to have your sin absolved is problematic, right? Because your relationship with the divine is now outsourced and distant from yourself and routed through a third party. And to this third party, you owe your allegiance, your loyalty, your money, your, what's going on with you? Go in. She's gonna go in. I think she's all right. She's just, it's really hot up here and bright, so I think she's had enough of the elements out here. And ask Daddy if you need anything, because he's right there. So as much as that is true for the church, that's also been true for political institutions. There's been monarchies, right? I'm talking about historically. Throughout Europe, there were monarchies, there were kings and queens, and there were these big figureheads, and here we were, the underclass, and we were to, wow, look at these kings and queens and their jewels and their thrones, and live vicariously through them in some way. Like, this is our royalty, this is our leaders, our rulers. But there was a parasitic relationship with our power because, you know, we were not treated as equal. We were not treated as capable of governing ourselves. So, and then there's also a lot of negativity around the concept of leadership in the spiritual community. All of this, by the way, has really understandable reasons as to why, and Sammy, I'm going to get to that. That's one of my next points. So, you know, when we think of leader, we think of, in the spiritual sense, it very often goes to cult leader, and we think of these spiritual figures, these gurus with the all-knowing ability to, like, meditate for thousands of hours, or, you know, heal people by hugging them, or, you know, practice some type of yogic breathing that gives them some type of, you know, supernatural power, or whatever the case may be. So even within the spiritual community, there's been this outsourcing of power to these leaders and gurus that has led to a lot of abuse. And it's been, in the last, let's say, 5 years, people have really been unpacking that abuse and saying, I am no longer willing to outsource my spiritual authority to this so-called leader who's actually taking advantage of people and seeking to control people. So the one thing that all these types of leadership have in common is control. They all are seeking to control the individual rather than empower the individual. So here in the United States, now we have coronavirus pandemic happening to the extent that, you know, I'm not going to argue here the extent to which it's been exaggerated by the media or is or isn't real. That's a whole other conversation. But one thing we can say for sure is that it's affecting all of us. There's been, you know, all types of issues around, you know, should we wear masks? Are we supposed to social distance? How dangerous really is this? What are the motives behind why we're being asked to do, you know, X, Y, and Z? And there's so much in that. And I feel like there's been a real absence of what I would consider real and grounded leadership. And I will get back to what I think that is in a minute. But first I want to acknowledge that a lot of people have a lot of negativity around, a lot of negative associations to the idea of leadership. And that I think that there's valid, very valid reasons why. So do we even want leaders? Like, what would it mean to have aligned leadership? Like, I've heard some people say that they don't want to be led. They just want to live their own life and be free and be self-governed. I think there's a lot to that because that's the sovereignty piece. People want to reclaim their power and feel sovereign and be sovereign. I also think that there's limitations to that model because it leads us down a path of, like, really extreme individuality and independence. And I think we all know now that there's a downside to independence as it's been sold to us. There's an upside to being free and being self-actualized and being sovereign. There's a downside to being isolated and alone and having to be the only person on earth that you can even trust because other people are so far away from you and we're all so independent that we can't be bothered to actually talk to one another anymore. And there's no trust. And there's no intimacy, and we don't even expect that anymore because we don't expect to have leaders we can trust. We are sort of like in a cynical relationship with almost everything, and I understand why. I have that within me as well, where I go, you know, I don't even want to be part of the system, and I don't want to be part of any systems because look what happens when humans are in systems. It gets corrupt. So there's, as Ryan says, balance. There's the need to be sovereign in one's power, And then we have to decide as a collective, like, do we think that there is such a thing as leadership? And if there is, what does it look like? So when I'm asking these big, complex questions, I go back to the model of usually indigenous ways, and in particular, like certain lineages that I really respect how things have gone with them and their value system and their morality, and how they've been able to maintain care for one another. Because if you go to like native land and you tell them, I'm just independent and I just look out for me and I don't have any leaders and I don't need to be governed by anyone and I'm not governed by anyone either, they're going to be like, wow, that's sad. They're actually going to think that there's sadness in that. And I tend to agree with that. I think it goes too far where it becomes a form of like, we're like prickly, porcupines, we're so far away from everyone and everything that there's something lost there. There's a thread that's lost in the form of intimacy and real connection. So I like to go back to like, what are these models of leadership that have worked in traditional societies? And when I say traditional, there's lots of different models we could draw from. But, I look back to my own lineage of the Essenes, who were an ancient Judaic people. This was a long time ago, before the Romans. And I look to contemporary native peoples who are here in Arizona with us that we've had a chance to spend time with so that we could get to know them a little bit. And I notice a few things about what they see as being leadership. One is that leadership requires a strong leader will hold other people as important and as valid as themselves. They will not be seeking to have power over. They will be honest. They will not seek to manipulate. They will not withhold information on the basis of, oh, well, they can't know that because they're too stupid. They're not, prepared to know anything. They will not say that their own connection to divinity is more important than your connection to divinity. They will not try to extort you for money. They will not kind of keep it all hid, like the Bob Dylan line, look out kid, they keep it all hid. Like our society now, the way the leaders are, they keep it all hid, right? Leaders in quotes. All of the money and the power is kind of behind these doors and these backroom deals that we don't have access to, and I don't think aligned leadership looks like that. I think aligned leaders would seek to create other leaders. In other words, they would help other people actualize into their full power, and that would involve true care. And it's more of an eldership model than it is a leadership model. So it's not so much about, I am your leader and you are my underling. It's more like, I've lived a lot of life. I've been granted certain expertise, certain information, and embodied wisdom as a function of having lived this life for real. And I've earned trust and respect from the people around me because I have lived truly on this path with humility, recognizing that I am not the biggest and most important thing there is, because it is the cosmos, which we're all connected into, that a leader is really serving. They're not serving themselves. And I guess being self-serving is a huge trait of the pathological leaders that we have today. They like to self-aggrandize. It's about them. It's about stealing from others so that they can be puffed up. And I think real leadership is the exact opposite of that. Do I think that leadership is an important concept? I do. Because if you're going to have any groups of people larger than, like, let's say a nuclear family, and even that you might have to have leadership within, let's say any people who are bonded together with a common ethos, a common way of life, a common belief system, a common goal, a common dream, and making that dream happen, there needs to be some type of cohesion, a strong enough cohesion within that vision, and a strong enough accountability, and strong enough, guidance, really, that people are on the same path together and executing the same dream side by side. So it's not a model of hierarchy, but in order to create that type of cohesion, I think, and this is where I feel like our current leadership is failing miserably, and I'm talking about Trump right now. The word leader and Trump for me, like, can I even put those two words together? I'm not sure, but the current administration is not leading in this time of crisis. So when this coronavirus pandemic first started, and people, I believe, are legitimately dying of this, and it is perilous, not to the extent maybe necessarily that we need to all be in panic and running around, taking extreme measures, but I think that there are precautions that have been indicated, and there needed to be cohesion. That is the key word of what I think was missing. We didn't have a leader who was coming out with empathy, sound judgment and guidance, a plan, a real plan that would serve the people in navigating themselves and each other to wellness through this, and something that really felt grounded in both logic and love, because I think those two really need to go hand in hand. And there was a real lack of a plan, like a cohesive plan that people could believe in. And so it became and is still spiraling into like a clusterfuck. It is just spiraling into this chaos because there is a power vacuum of legitimate power and legitimate leadership. And I've even written documents for my own exercise as to what I would like to have seen happen. Like if I had a leader I could really trust, and by the way, I do believe that there are leaders that are trustable, that is a comprehensive concept. It is possible to have a good leader and someone who is trustworthy and truly in service to, as I said, the cosmos that connects us all. I believe in that. And I wrote, for myself, I've written documents like, this is what I would have loved to have seen happen, and this is what I think would have been cohesive, and this is what I think would have demonstrated empathy and gotten people's hearts ignited so that they could figure out how to come together. And this is how I think we could have incentivized any necessary sacrifices, like personal sacrifices, in the short term to help people get through to the long term safely and then reopen safely. So I've written these, pieces for my own, as I said, to exercise my own intellect and my own heart with regards to what I think could have happened. And I mean, I don't think anybody can execute these things perfectly, but I think that there could have been some, leadership that looked a lot better. Secondly, what's happening right now? I think, there's this huge racial division going on in the country, or, there's pain is what there is. There's a lot of pain and upset, rightly so, because of unfair treatment, because of actual horrible crimes that are taking place, and a lack of justice. And there is a distrust of the justice system and the legal system, because anyone who is, people of color, disabled people, elderly people who are not well represented by this particular system, can't trust in this system. How could they? I mean, if anything ever goes wrong and you go to a court of law, do you really think the court's gonna have your back? The court's stacked against the truth as it stands now. Our systems are essentially inverted because of the exact thing that I talked about earlier, that the concept of leadership is inverted, where it should be serving the cosmos, it's self-serving in its corrupted form. And so people cannot trust that there would be any form of real justice within our own justice systems. And I am, in quotes, that's like the biggest sarcastic. When I say justice system, I'm like I almost like throw up in my mouth a little, because I feel like our justice system is so inverted. And, I'm someone who survived childhood abuse and was asked at different times, like, do you want to, I don't know what just happened there. Something went dark. Do you want to prosecute your abuser in the court? And I was like, I don't want to go anywhere near a U.S. court, because I don't trust whatsoever that they would have my back. I don't think justice would be carried out. In fact, I'm pretty sure that this guy, who's a very charming, malignant narcissist, would simply be able to reverse and invert the court in his favor if it wasn't already. And as someone who's advocated for many years for sexual abuse survivors, including myself, I've often said, like, forget the U.S. justice system, because justice is not present in 98% of the cases. I think it's changing, and there are people who have fought for that, and I think it's valiant, because I didn't want to fight for that. I was like, that just sounds like a big black hole and a big waste of my time to try to right a system that is fundamentally inverted. But the point being that, when there's a murder of a black man by a cop who's supposed to be representing the law, and there's no justice because our own president instead of coming out on the side of right and saying like this should never have happened and this is deplorable and this has to be stopped and changed now, says nothing, or tacitly kind of winks at the predators in his actions. How on earth could people trust the leadership of the country? And so of course people take to the streets, and of course there's anarchy and chaos, and now we have just a lot of harm and a lot of hurt unfolding. And to me it's like, well, of course that unfolded because there's a power vacuum. There is a vacuum of real leadership. So that's why I became very interested in, okay, what does real leadership look like? And to me, real leadership would have looked like immediately arresting and charging the people involved, coming out with a public statement as the president saying, this will not happen anymore, and we will do whatever is necessary to root this out of our systems, to change everything here. We will implement anti-racist programs in every single one of our police precincts. We will screen all of our public officials and all of our law enforcement agents in every single sector to make sure that this is no longer a thing in America. Like, come out and be brave and say something morally strong, but we don't have a leader like that. And so it made me start to think about like, okay, why don't we ever have in the United States of America anyone that I personally would feel good about even voting for? And I've, it's been a long time since I've voted, since I've gone to the polls and been like, yes, this is a candidate that I can back. And I've had a lot of people tell me, well, one's better than the other and you really should vote for the lesser of the two evils and so on. But I haven't been able to do that because I haven't found anybody who's like less evil enough for me to even want to back that. So why don't we have any viable candidates? I mean, obviously, one big issue is that the money that the corporations who fund the campaign finance and the whole power system behind the monetary scheme of who gets to be president or who doesn't, blackball anybody who is anti-corporation or who would seek to dismantle the corruption with regards to that. And so that's obviously a huge issue. But I think another big issue, and something we can all work on ourselves, which is really the reason I went live today, is we ourselves need to do our work to be able to even recognize aligned leadership when we see it, and to advocate for that and to call that in. And there's work that needs to be done within us to make that happen. And the reason there is that work is because we have this very long history of indoctrination with regards to what leadership should look like. And I just explained, there's been monarchies, there's been church authorities in quotes that have wanted to take charge of our own relationship with divinity, and there's been all these different types of corruption with regards to what leaders are, and that has internal consequences for what we ourselves seek in a leader. So I'm going to talk about the part I think we can do internally. Number one, get clear about any place in your life where you are still pedestalizing anyone or anything outside of yourself, and or vilifying anything outside yourself to an extent that is distracting or impoverishing of your own relationship with your own power. So the pedestal thing. Right now I've been talking a lot about how like Donald Trump is like, suddenly he's the Messiah, according to like certain people. And, he's a savior. He's the savior of the underground children who've been sex trafficked. And he's, got this very deep plan that's all unfolding mysteriously, even though there's really no evidence for it. And suddenly he's this messianic figure. So that's what I would call pedestalizing. Like, this is not, in my personal opinion, a grounded way to view what's happening here. Like, it's not verified, it's not factual, and it's not in your hands. It's outsourced. So this is a messianic thing. And why do we have to look out for this pedestalizing thing? Well, it's because of religious indoctrination, because what does the Christian church teach? It teaches that there is one God, there is one Messiah. His name is Jesus Christ. He died for your sins. And you can't do jack shit to save yourself. Only he can, not you. And that's the common teachings of the church, I call that, radically impoverishing of the human being. Because it takes responsibility for your own life force and your own power out of your hands and puts it in the hands of this false Messiah. So now we see in our own behavior, we see pedestalizing in ourselves. If we're looking, and the Trump thing is just one example. I mean, it could be Kim Kardashian. It could be Kobe Bryant. It could be, that spiritual leader that Teal Swan. It could be any number of different people that we slot in to our own, in between us and God, essentially, in between us and our own relationship with power and divinity, and we say that person is the thing, and I need to look out to them because they're doing all these things and they're giving me something in return, so I'm going to keep them on this big pedestal on high. The problem with pedestals is that people fall off of them because they never belong there in the first place. And we also have a toxic relationship with putting people on pedestals so that we can tear them down, because it was an unsustainable, ungrounded way of seeing them in the first place. So instead of seeing your leader as being way up here, if it's a spiritual teacher, if it's a political figure, whatever it is, if it's a powerful speaker, admire them for all that they are, listen to them, and take that in. But at the end of the day, they're just a human being just like you. They will make mistakes. They will probably disappoint you at some point. They are still learning. They have blind spots. They are no more the Messiah than you are the Messiah. They are no more deserving of your power, certainly no more deserving of your power than you are deserving of your own power and trust. So, establishing that trust with regards to ourselves, that we are able to maintain our center in the face of something we admire, something that seems powerful, that's also outside of ourselves, without giving ourselves away, is huge. Because how can we ever have aligned leaders if we ourselves are not prepared to accept an aligned leader without putting them on a false pedestal and then tearing them down? So that's just one simple example of the internal work that I think, and I would look at your relationship with celebrity, relationship with anything that makes you a little bit starstruck, relationship with, as I said, spiritual teachers and leaders, your own religious beliefs. Where are we dealing in toxic notions of what a leader is and expecting something unrealistic and ungrounded from that leader? And then on the other side of that, my cat wants to go in, where are we falsely vilifying people? Now that's the other side of the same equation. Now we talk a lot in the Q community, there's a lot of talk about the elites. Now the internet is, replete with talk of the elites and how the elites want to enslave people, and the elites have manipulated you, and the elites have this dark plan that they're trying to use to destroy you. And then some people will say the same thing about Trump, that he's the devil and he's the villain. And you have to look at your villain characters as well, because they are just the flip side of your leaders. So if you have an imbalanced relationship with regards to leadership on one side because you got somebody up on a pedestal, if you have an angel, you almost assuredly have a devil too. They go together. If you have a false Messiah, then you have a false villain. And neither of them tell the full truth. And that doesn't mean that there aren't people who do good things and bad things on earth. It doesn't mean that there's no difference in people's morality, because there certainly is. But everyone is human, and no one is more powerful than you. So no demon or devil incarnate, no Bill Gates, no Trump, or anybody is more powerful than you in terms of their ability to control you. And no one is above you in terms of their ability to lead you. We're all equally capable, and yet there is work to actualize that capability. So if we can just normalize our own relationship with leadership within ourselves and how we conduct that, I think that's a huge piece to finding leadership in the country, or in the world, or even in small, say, a spiritual community. Let's say you want to be part of a sustainable community like Off-Grid, and you want to have 100 people in your community. To even find aligned leadership or be aligned leadership for that size of a community is not a small feat. It takes a lot of personal development of not only yourself, but your community to show up in a way that you guys won't just destroy each other and reenact like the Planet of the Apes. I've seen it happen. I've been, incidentally like found myself in that and just been like, no, I don't want it. And if we don't want to recreate the same old monsters, we need to evolve in ourselves with regards to our ability to recognize real leadership. And then the next piece of that I want to bring in is that some of us might feel like we can be that leadership in one way or another. And, that's been a really difficult one for me, because at different times in my life, people have called me a leader, and they've been really, really eager to see me take on that role. And I've been really reluctant to call myself that for years, because I've experienced the false pedestaling and then the tearing off of the pedestal. And I've experienced the pain around that, because if someone places you in a position of leadership and they haven't done that internal work that I just talked about, that avoids either the pedestaling or the vilification, right? Those binaries that we get into that are like way too extreme. They will see you as a leader, and then the minute that you say one thing that they don't like, or they get a little jealous of you, or they had a bad hair day, or who even knows what the triggers are, they will turn 180 degrees and try to take you from the leader position down into the villain position. And the fall can be rapid and very, very unfair, and not grounded in real, in my perspective and experience, not grounded in real events. So because they were already projecting on you, they have no problem changing that projection to some other inaccurate projection. And they didn't see you accurately when you were in this elevated place, and they're not seeing you accurately when you're in this villain place either, because it's really what's going on in them, in their mind, that they haven't cleared their own relationship with leadership yet enough to allow someone to just be human. So for me personally, the kind of leader that I've always wanted to be, if I was to be a leader at all, hi Hannon, my husband just popped on, to be any kind of leader at all, I would want to be a vulnerable leader. I'd want to be a real leader. I'd want to be a leader who had bad days, who made mistakes and could admit that so that I could grow, and have enough space and trust given to me that my heart was sound, and that I had established that type of trust with my community, that if I said one thing that they didn't like, or they were a little bit unsure about my intentions with regards to something, or something was a bit unclear, they wouldn't just throw me under the bus and then be like, she's the devil, and pull me down off the false pedestal that I never wanted to be in on the first place, and throw me to the wolves, or try to, because I didn't meet their like false expectations. You know what I mean? So there's a call for real leaders, but to be a real leader, it requires vulnerability. And I think this is like the thesis statement that I was trying to get to in my little talk here, is that, to be a real leader is vulnerable. So, okay, if we had a real leader arise in the presidential race in our country, they would not be able to make it as it is now. They wouldn't be fake enough. They wouldn't be narcissistic enough, and they wouldn't be meet our expectations enough for us to even allow that candidate to rise. Because if they showed up in realness, if they showed up in vulnerability and authenticity, and not knowing everything and acknowledging that they didn't know everything, people would tear them to pieces just for that. And I feel like that's a real problem. It's a real obstacle. And I've thought at different times about stepping into like bigger leadership roles to try to like do what I can, because I have a heart that wants to do that, and I have a mind that can provide a certain amount of sound, reasonable analysis and embodiment of important, movements and dynamics. Like I think I could have probably helped with the coronavirus thing as far as moving our country through in a safe way. If I had been on a council of some sort, like a high council of like trusted elders, and we all really trusted each other, I feel like I could have been a voice at that table, and I would have liked to have been in that type of scenario. But the way that leadership plays out in our current era, you can't do that, because the expectation of narcissism is there. Even if the narcissism itself wasn't there, our own expectation of narcissism and the same type of outsourcing of power and pedestaling and vilifying that I'm talking about, it's in us too. It's in the population. So I've experienced this a lot firsthand as someone who I really want to help my world, you know, the world we live in. I want to serve that cosmos that I was talking about earlier. That for me, being a leader is all about serving the cosmos that we're all part of. And I have a heart for that service. And it's actually been a challenge because the minute you step too much into a leadership role, there's people who get jealous. There's people who will make false accusations. There's people who will lie about you for no reason whatsoever and distort your point of view and just, you know, really be bad to you for having the courage or the heart of wanting to come out as a real leader and actually guide people in a way that feels real. So there is an enormous challenge to being a real leader. And not only have we not reconciled, I mean, the first step is to reconcile our ability to recognize real leadership and to even know what we want in that arena and say, like, this is the type of leadership that I'm committed to supporting in my world. But then it's a whole other step, it's a whole other leap from that place to say, and I'm ready to be that leader in some type of capacity. And my tendency recently has been to run away from the human race. And that's, you know, kind of painful. Like, I think I have more to give than I feel safe to give. And I think that's a conundrum for a lot of people who feel like, you know, called to that we want to do it, but we want to do it without being crucified. We don't want to be your crucified Messiah. We just don't want that. Like, real leaders don't want that. We don't want that old model. We don't want you to outsource your power and invest it in us and then get disappointed when we don't meet those false expectations. We want you to be empowered. You know, we want every single person on this earth to work together harmoniously and bring their own gifts to the table and be their own kind of leader so that leaders create other leaders. And, you know, that's been something that I've wanted. And like Hannah and I have struggled with this because if we are a bright light and we are, you know, loving and we are having a great time in our family, and I share a lot of images around that and I try to share as much as I can of what's going on, but, you know, people will throw rocks at you for no other reason than you're shiny. So there's just like, you know, or even make lies up about you and distort, you know, who you are and who you showed up as. So it's very, what I'm saying is that if we want to have a president at some point in this country, if that's even a goal anymore, I don't know. I don't even know if I believe that's a goal. I don't know if I think that the whole place should just literally burn down and like we have to start over with something completely new in terms of power structures. I mean, not physically completely burning down. I know that is happening right now in a lot of places and definitely, you know, more than symbolically. But I don't know if like the system can be saved and then we can expect at any point like a real leader to come in to the system and really advocate for these things that I'm standing for, or if the whole thing really has to crumble and this whole civilization has to basically fall in order for us to like create something that feels even a little bit like real leadership. And I don't have a ton of hope for that right now. Like, I am not running for president, you know, of this country. I couldn't ever get involved with the power structure the way that it is. It wouldn't accept or even recognize who I am. And I know that. In my own little corner of the world, I've tried to build institutions of small communities, let's say, of like-minded individuals who, I'm so glad this is resonant. Small communities of people who want to come together to build a common dream, as they state. Because I'm one of those people who, the minute you show up in my space, I'm like, do you really want this? Because if you don't really want this, you should go now, because I am not fucking around here. Like, I'm dead serious about what I say I'm gonna, you know, do. And I expect other people to show up in full accountability also, because if we don't, we can't build that thing. And even within, you know, small communities of like a couple dozen people, you run into gossip, you run into manipulators who want to derail the whole thing just because they kind of want to like take a shit in your garden, you know, for no other reason than that. Like, you run into that one person who's so jealous of you that they can't see straight, and they'll just do anything to manipulate all the other people in the circle to like turn against you, or just a bunch of nonsense. Or you run into complacent people, people who like show up and like, yeah, I really, really want this and I want to do the thing. But then when you ask them to actually do anything, they get extremely mad at you, because there were, again, another feature of leadership is that the old model of leadership, the corrupt one, doesn't ask for self-accountability. And the new model of leadership does ask for and require self-accountability. And when I say new, I mean ancient, because there are, you know, societies who've lived like this all along. As I mentioned, the more traditional societies. So like any type of real leadership has to include holding others responsible and accountable for their own behavior, because that's the only way that wellness can occur, for one thing, and that's also the only way that people can really come together in that cohesion that I was talking about. So I've run into certain issues, you know, and I've stepped back from it. Like, okay, I know that there's this person, you know, being manipulative in my community. What do I do about that? How do I handle this in terms of accountability without like burning the whole thing down? And how do I set that boundary and like keep the community from like, you know, I mean, it's kind of like the Moses going across the desert story, where the people are grumbling and then they get like dissatisfied and it didn't go their way, so now they think Moses is like a jerk or whatever. And you run into those problems in real time when you're doing that type of leadership. So it starts so humbly, and I've been deeply humbled by even the question of what it would mean to be a leader, and whether or not I can even do that with the skill set and the sensitivity level that I have. And given the standards and that I really want to build a power structure that looks completely different, in that everyone is empowered and actualized within it. And I do think that there are guides and mentors, like there are elders who have things to teach us, and there have been people who have led me. And I'm really happy when I meet a leader, a real leader, that I can say like, wow, this person stands in their integrity, does what they say, is gentle and compassionate, you know, has their feet on the ground, and really cares about each and every individual, you know, in their circle. Like, when I see that, I'm like, eureka, it exists, and I know that it does. So if we're calling in something, I mean, it's 2020, it's an election year, and our choices are pitiful. I mean, they're really bad. But let's just imagine, like, if we could, like, what would we be calling in terms of leadership for the United States of America, if we still believe that's a thing? And if we don't think that that's a thing, then what are we committed to in our own personal lives to help move us forward to a new world that looks different and has real leadership as a feature of it? Whether that's on a very small micro level, as I'm talking about, with like a dozen people, or whether that's on a huge community-wide level of a much larger collective. Like, I think we need to start asking, stop complaining. I mean, the complaining it's necessary, and like, I get it, and the burning down of things, the death part of the death rebirth cycle is not to be bypassed. And I think that's where we're at right now. Excuse me. I honor everyone's sacred rage within that. There's definitely reasons why that's valid. But then on the next step beyond that is, if we're burning things down, what are we burning that down in order to create? You know, what would we like to have? What if we could see a leader that we would honor? What features would they have? And then ask the question, personally, am I prepared to let that type of leadership even exist in my life? Like, first of all, does it exist in my life? Like, do I have that type of relationship with myself or others, as far as like being an aligned leader, recognizing that, calling that in, and being able to hold it without doing the pedestalizing, vilifying, binary? If I can't, then I need to do work there, in my opinion. I think that it comes back to that. But then if you can do that, then does that exist in your life? Can you plant the seeds of that somewhere? You know, what would it look like if you did? These are all questions I ask myself a lot, and I don't have answers, so I'm not here to give you answers. I'm just throwing out a few things that are on my heart right now, and it pains me that we don't have this represented in our world, you know, at a time like this when people really are in pain and there's a lot of suffering. it pains me to see, you know, it's sort of like this divine mother heart of like, ow, like I wish, you know, we had a voice of guidance, like real guidance who, you know, could give us those words of hope when we really need them. And I mean on a larger scale than, you know, I wish I could maybe do that on a larger scale. I don't know if I'd be successful, but like whomever, it doesn't matter if it's me or whomever, like the voice of the divine mother, let's say, just, you know, offering guidance when it's helpful, offering a lantern in the dark, giving us some sound counsel and some real logical, you know, ways of moving forward that are also practical. Like, hey, I can do this in my own life. This is now doable and empowering. And, you know, kind of easing, putting a balm on the divisions and addressing the injustices, like in a real way, that actually changes the institutions. And, you know, I want us to have that voice at moments like these. And we can find it within ourselves. I think we can find that voice. It's not always easy. Sometimes it's easy. Sometimes it's nice to have another figure in your life who can mirror that for you. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Like, if you got really upset, you called up your mom, like, hey mom, what should I do? And she gave you really good advice. Isn't that a valuable thing? And that's the kind of leadership that I'm talking about that I think we've gotten away from when we say like, oh, I don't want to be led. I'm independent. I do my own thing. I'm sovereign. I got boundaries. I don't need people. I'm like, wait a minute. Okay, yes, you are sovereign. And don't you want to be able to make that phone call sometime and have somebody be like, you know, here's the way I can be here for you. And here's how I can give you a little bit of guidance in your time of need. And then maybe you can do this, pay it forward and do the same thing for someone else. But like, I think we need to not throw the baby out with the bathwater with regards to what leadership and real aligned guidance and eldership might look like. That's my sense. Okay, I'm gonna leave it at that. I will go back and answer some questions and, you know, anything else you guys wanna say. And thank you for being here. I would like to do more of these. This is another part of like, you know, something I've struggled with, like being this vulnerable in public. It's not easy, and to make space for myself to continue to be the person I want to be, I have to be this vulnerable. So it is helpful for me when you guys see that. I know so many of you do. It makes me smile. Like, I feel like in our local community, we have so much talent and so much heart. And I think if anybody could pull this off, you know, and be the seeds of a future world that has, you know, more hope in it, like we can. So that's why I'm here. Okay. Love you guys.